I never thought boredom could feel like a curse, but that night, as the hours stretched into something empty and cold, I realized how dangerous silence could be when you have nothing but your own thoughts for company. The screen of my laptop cast a pale glow across the room, washing my walls in a sickly blue that made everything, the unmade bed, the half-empty water bottle, the pile of clothes I kept promising myself I'd put away, seem somehow unreal, as if I was peering into someone else's life instead of my own. Outside my window, the sky was a bottomless ink spill, and the distant hum of traffic felt like the last fragile thread connecting me to the world beyond these four walls. I had scrolled through every social media feed, rewatched the same mindless videos, and clicked through headlines that felt too far away to mean anything, until finally, in a moment of restless curiosity that now feels like a fatal mistake, I opened a random chat site, the kind where you meet strangers you'll never talk to again, faces flickering in and out like ghosts on the other side of the screen. I wasn't looking for anything, not really. Maybe just a few meaningless jokes with someone halfway across the world, a fleeting human connection to pierce through the suffocating quiet of my empty apartment. The site loaded slower than I expected, like the universe itself was giving me one last chance to change my mind, to close the tab and go to sleep, but instead, I watched the screen refresh, names scrolling by, Dark Knight 77, Lonely in Berlin, 2666XX, each one a strange little doorway into someone else's reality. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the silence of the room pressing against my skin like cold breath on the back of my neck, and then, without thinking, I clicked on a username that stood out from the rest, Inside Your Room 95, the kind of edgy, stupid name people pick when they want attention, or when they think being creepy online is still some kind of twisted joke. I remember smirking to myself, thinking this was exactly the kind of nonsense I had come here for, and then the chat window opened, filling my screen with a simple message that drained the warmth from my body like blood from a cut I didn't know I had. You left the light on in your bathroom. At first, I thought it was some kind of prank, a lucky guess, a one-in-a-million shot that some bored stranger had taken just to mess with me, but as I turned my head toward the bathroom door, I felt the air in the room shift, the kind of electric stillness that makes your scalp tighten and your stomach twist, because the light was on, a thin sliver of yellow seeping under the door, even though I hadn't been in there for hours. My hand shook slightly as I typed back, trying to keep the tone casual, trying to convince myself this was funny and not terrifying, asking how they knew, expecting some joke about psychic powers or security cameras, but the reply came faster than I could blink, and this time, my breath caught in my throat because the message said, "You're sitting on your bed, cross-legged, wearing that old hoodie with the hole in the sleeve, the one you keep meaning to throw away." My stomach turned to ice, my fingers froze over the keyboard, and in that breathless, heart-stopping second, I realized something that flipped my world upside down. My webcam was covered, the lens buried beneath a strip of electrical tape I had placed there months ago. This person, whoever they were, could see me, describe me in perfect detail, without a single camera or microphone switched on, and for the first time that night, I knew with bone-deep certainty that I was no longer alone in my room. For a moment, my brain refused to believe what my eyes were seeing, as if the message on my screen and the dark, empty room around me belonged to two separate realities that couldn't possibly overlap. I sat there, heart punching against my ribs like it was trying to break out of my chest, my hands trembling so violently that I accidentally nudged the mouse, causing the cursor to flicker across the screen like a nervous insect skittering away from danger. The logical part of my mind scrambled to make sense of it all. Maybe I had forgotten to remove the webcam cover earlier, maybe the site somehow had access to my camera without my permission, maybe this was some elaborate prank from a friend who knew how to hack. But none of those explanations could account for the way this stranger described the exact position of my hands, the frayed sleeve of my hoodie, and even the half-eaten bag of chips crushed between my pillows. It wasn't just general guessing, it was detailed, intimate, suffocatingly accurate, like someone standing right behind me, breathing down my neck, their eyes roaming over every inch of my body in my space, unblinking and too close. I tried to play it off like a joke, like I was still in control, typing back a quick reply that was supposed to sound cocky but ended up reading more like desperation in text form. Very funny. I'm impressed. Now, who the hell are you? The response came instantly, as if the stranger had been waiting for me to ask, fingers already resting on the keys, eager to peel back another layer of my reality just to watch me squirm. You should really close your closet door. It's rude to leave someone staring like that. My stomach folded into itself, my skin turning cold and damp as I slowly turned my head toward the closet, heart hammering loud enough to drown out every other sound in the room. The door was open, just a crack, but enough for me to see inside, enough for me to remember that I always closed that door at night because the sight of that gaping darkness between the door and the frame had creeped me out since childhood. Except now, the crack wasn't empty. I couldn't see anyone, not fully, but there was a shape, a bend in the shadows that didn't belong, a suggestion of fingers curling around the edge of the door, fingers far too long, too pale, and too still, like they had been waiting there all along, just out of sight, listening to me breathe, watching me type, silently grinning in the dark. My entire body locked up, instinct screaming at me to move, to run, to slam the laptop shut and get the hell out of there, but my curiosity, or maybe my fear-addled brain desperate for answers, forced me to type one more message with hands so slick with sweat they slipped across the keyboard. How do you know what's in my closet? Are you watching me? The reply this time didn't come as words. The chat window glitched, the text box dissolving into a mess of static and symbols that rearranged themselves into something far worse, a live feed from inside my room. The camera angle wasn't from my laptop, or my phone, or any device I could recognize. It was from the top corner of my ceiling, a perfect bird's-eye view capturing every inch of my bedroom in suffocating detail, including me sitting cross-legged on the bed, pale-faced and trembling, staring up at the screen like my own reflection was staring back at me from somewhere I couldn't see. I opened my mouth to scream, but before I could make a sound, a final message appeared beneath the feed, typed so slowly it felt deliberate, like someone whispering in my ear syllable by syllable, "I see you. And so does the thing under your bed." My first instinct was to jump off the bed, to put as much distance as possible between me and the space underneath, that familiar rectangle of shadow I had ignored every night for years, comforting myself with the childish lie that monsters only existed in stories and dreams, never in the safe, boring reality of my own bedroom. But the second my feet touched the floor, I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of cold air rising from that black void beneath the mattress, a damp breath like something exhaling straight from the earth's throat, carrying the metallic stench of rusted metal and something far worse, something organic, something rotting. My hand shot out to the laptop, fingers trembling so violently I could barely control the cursor, desperately trying to close the chat window or power down the computer, but nothing worked. The screen flickered, stuttered, then froze completely, locking me in that impossible bird's-eye view of myself crouched beside the bed, wide-eyed and shaking, with something moving in the lower corner of the screen. It wasn't a clear shape, not at first, just the suggestion of movement, like fingers pressing against fabric, bulging the underside of the mattress upwards, tracing invisible shapes on the surface where I had been sitting just seconds before, and as the realization hit me, I felt my throat lock up, lungs refusing to pull in air, because that thing under my bed had been lying directly beneath me the entire time. I wanted to scream, wanted to bolt for the door, but before I could even gather the courage to stand, a new message appeared in the chat, typed so slowly it felt like someone drawing the letters with a shaking hand, each word sinking deeper into my skin like a knife pressing between my ribs. "Don't move. It likes when you move." My pulse thundered so loud in my ears that the room around me faded into nothing but noise, my vision narrowing to that one cursed line of text, my entire body locked in place like a puppet whose strings had been cut. I could feel it now, not just the presence under the bed, but the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me from every angle, the camera in the ceiling capturing my panic, the thing in the closet peering through that narrow crack, and the thing under the bed, breathing so softly it almost blended with the hum of my computer fan. The messages kept coming, each one more invasive, more impossible, describing things I had never told anyone, secrets I had only ever thought inside my own head, memories I hadn't revisited in years, the time I stole money from my mother's purse, the name of the pet I accidentally killed when I was 10, the words I whispered to myself after my first heartbreak. This wasn't a hacker playing games, this wasn't a ghost stuck between dimensions, this was something else entirely, something that had been with me for a very, very long time, watching, waiting, learning every twisted detail of my life until it knew me better than I knew myself. The air in the room grew thicker, charged with a static pressure that made my ears pop and my skin crawl, and then, without warning, the lights cut out, plunging the room into a darkness so complete I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or shut. In that blind void, the laptop screen became the only source of light, a pale, flickering square in the suffocating black, and on that screen, the live feed had changed angles, no longer showing me from above, but instead, capturing my own face from under the bed, seen through the eyes of whatever was down there, staring up at me through the cracks between the mattress and the frame. My own terrified expression filled the screen, distorted by static and noise, my breath coming in rapid, stuttering gasps as the thing's fingers crept into view, thin, white, segmented like broken porcelain, each joint bending too far in the wrong direction as they reached up toward my dangling hand. And before I could pull away, those fingers gripped my wrist, ice cold and impossibly strong, and pulled, dragging me down toward the floor, toward that gap beneath the bed where no light could reach, and the screen filled with a final message, typed in trembling letters as my vision blurred and my scream caught somewhere deep inside my throat. Now you live down here too. I don't remember hitting the floor, but I remember the sound my body made when I landed, a dull, wet slap like raw meat dropped onto concrete, even though my floor is just carpet and splintered wood. For a moment, I couldn't tell if I had been yanked fully under the bed or if my mind had twisted the panic into hallucination, because the world around me had changed in a way that felt wrong. The room was still my room, the air was still heavy with that stale scent of old clothes and dust, but everything had shifted slightly, like the dimensions themselves no longer fit. The ceiling felt closer, the shadows stretched in directions that didn't match the angles of my lamp, and the air itself seemed to pulse, vibrating against my skin with the rhythmic, too slow tempo of a dying heart. My laptop was still open, the screen glowing far too bright in the surrounding dark, and the chat window was still there, but the text had changed, no longer simple messages from a stranger but instead a live transcript of my breathing, each inhale and exhale appearing in jagged letters, time stamped down to the millisecond. My chest felt tight, throat burning with held-back screams I didn't dare release, and then, just as I thought I might finally find the strength to move, the screen spoke to me directly, "Don't look at the window." I was stupid enough to look at the window. At first, I thought the glass was just reflecting the laptop screen, a washed-out, glitching mirror version of my own terrified face, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized the reflection was wrong. The version of me in the glass wasn't moving correctly, wasn't breathing when I breathed, wasn't blinking when I blinked. Its mouth was opening too wide, stretching the skin around its jaw until it tore, the gaps filling with pulsing black static like a corrupted video file. Its arms hung at the wrong angle, elbows bent backward like they had been broken and hastily reassembled, and its skin. God, its skin shuddered as if something beneath it was pressing outward, dozens of tiny hands pushing against the inside of the flesh, their fingers stretching and clawing, desperate to escape. I staggered back from the window, knees colliding with the bed frame hard enough to bruise, but I couldn't tear my eyes away, because now the reflection wasn't alone. Behind my twisted doppelganger, just barely visible in the deep dark beyond the glass, stood a second figure, almost human but not quite, its body impossibly thin, its neck stretched far too long, its head tilting sharply to the side as if its bones had liquefied beneath the skin. Its face was featureless except for a mouth, a slit that ran from ear to ear, filled with nothing but more fingers, all of them twitching, reaching, scratching at the inside of the glass, leaving trails like claw marks on frozen breath. I stumbled away from the window, heart hammering so violently I was sure it would tear free from my chest, but the room wouldn't let me leave. The door was gone, replaced by nothing but a smooth wall, the kind of surface you'd find in a place that doesn't want you to escape. The chat window flickered again, text flooding the screen so fast I couldn't even read it, just a blur of broken phrases and half-formed words, but between the waves of glitching text, one sentence stood out, repeating over and over until the letters themselves seemed to bleed. "You should have stayed in bed." And then, with a sound like static tearing apart a human scream, the screen cut to black. not just the laptop, but every light in the room, every pixel of brightness in the entire world swallowed at once, leaving me alone in a darkness so complete it felt physical, like liquid tar filling my mouth and lungs and eyes, until I couldn't even tell if I was awake or dreaming or somewhere far, far worse. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed in that darkness so absolute it felt like the world itself had been switched off, leaving me trapped inside some unfinished corner of reality, a forgotten space where nothing obeyed the rules of time or physics or sanity. My breath felt too loud, every shallow gasp echoing off the walls with a strange, watery quality, as if the air itself had thickened into something viscous, something alive. My hands groped blindly in front of me, fingers trembling so badly I could hear the knuckles crack with each hesitant movement, but no matter how far I reached, the room itself seemed to shift away from me, the walls bending and stretching like the inside of a balloon being inflated far beyond its limit. And then, a knock. Soft at first, barely louder than my heartbeat, but impossibly close, coming from inside the wall directly behind me, so near I could almost feel the vibration through my spine. I didn't turn around. Every instinct in my body screamed that looking would break some fragile, invisible rule, the kind of rule you don't even know exists until you're already paying the price for breaking it, but the knock came again, harder this time, the rhythm matching the frantic pulse in my neck, as if something behind that wall could hear me breathe and was trying to sink itself to my fear. The knock became a scratching, nails or something much sharper dragging down the wall in uneven bursts, sometimes slow and deliberate like someone savoring the sound, sometimes frantic and chaotic like a trapped animal gnawing through its own flesh to escape. I stumbled back, feet tangling in the loose wires that snaked across my floor, nearly falling before catching myself against the desk, and that's when I saw the laptop screen flicker back to life, illuminating the room with a cold, unnatural glow. The chat window had changed again, the text now replaced with a countdown timer, the numbers bleeding red against the black background, ticking down from 66 seconds, each digit accompanied by a low, mechanical groan, like metal grinding against bone. I didn't know what would happen when it hit zero, I didn't want to know, but my body felt locked in place, knees trembling, sweat running down my spine in icy rivers, the same kind of paralyzing fear you feel in nightmares when you try to run, but your legs refuse to obey. The scratching grew louder, more desperate, the sound now coming from every wall at once, as if the room itself had been hollowed out, filled with unseen hands scraping to get through. And just as the timer reached 10 seconds, the walls began to breathe, expanding outward, then collapsing inward, a horrible rhythm that matched my own panicked gasps, as if the entire room had become a single, monstrous lung trying to inhale me whole. At zero, the screen erupted into static, the room plunged into darkness once more, but not silence, because now there was a new sound, something wet and too close, directly beneath me, coming from the floor itself. I dropped to my knees, fingers trembling as I brushed them across the carpet, and felt it immediately. The fabric was soaked, not with water, but with something thicker, something warm, something that moved beneath my touch like it was alive. The laptop flickered back on, and this time, the screen showed a live feed not from my room, but from beneath it, looking up through some unseen crack in the floorboards, capturing me from below, my pale face illuminated in the ghostly glow of the screen, my trembling hands stained with whatever was seeping up from the floor. The camera angle shifted, panning to the left, and that's when I saw it. The thing under the bed was no longer under the bed, because somehow, impossibly, the feed showed it standing directly behind me, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its mouth split wide enough to swallow me whole, and inside that mouth were more eyes, all of them open and staring, not at me, but at the screen, as if it knew I was watching, and wanted me to understand, this wasn't just happening to me anymore, now. It was watching whoever was watching me. There's a kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it sinks into your skin, sliding under your fingernails and wrapping around your bones, like the air itself has weight, pressing against you from every direction at once. That's the silence I was trapped in after seeing the thing's reflection in the screen, after realizing it wasn't just watching me, it knew I was watching it too. My mind fractured under the weight of that realization, splintering into sharp, useless thoughts that stabbed at each other, none of them making sense, all of them screaming at once. My own reflection was gone now, replaced entirely by the thing standing behind me, so close that if I had reached back, my fingers would have brushed its skin, if that pale, twitching surface could even be called skin at all. It was standing just beyond the edge of my vision, a tall, crooked figure, bones too long for the frame that barely contained them, head angled at something that could never be mistaken for human curiosity. Its fingers stretched slowly, each joint bending like damp paper, dragging those fingers across the back of my neck, and though I couldn't see it, I felt every inch, a touch too light to be accidental, too deliberate to be anything but a warning. I bolted forward, knocking the laptop off the desk in my blind panic, the screen spinning mid-air before slamming into the floor, but the image on the screen didn't change. It still showed the thing standing behind me, even though I had moved, which meant, and this realization almost made me vomit, the feed wasn't showing reality anymore. It was showing something deeper, something underneath reality, like the feed itself was a hole punched through my world into whatever dark place the thing had crawled from. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and when I pulled it out, the screen was already on, already open to a message I had never received before. No number, no contact name, just a single message: "This isn't your story anymore." I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, but something about that message paralyzed me, a sense of overwhelming wrongness, like the message itself was watching me, waiting to see how I'd react, as if the story I thought I was living wasn't mine at all. I was just a piece being moved across the board by something much larger, much older, something wearing the skin of technology like a mask. And then my laptop screen flickered again, and the feed shifted angles, no longer showing me, no longer showing my room. Now, it was showing someone else, a new room, a new face. Someone sitting at their desk, watching a video, my video, the exact story I'm telling you right now. And they were alone, just like I had been, their webcam covered, their lights flickering faintly in the background. The image on the screen zoomed closer, until I could see their face in terrifying detail: wide eyes, sweat-slick skin, mouth slightly open in frozen fear. And then, they flinched, turning sharply to look behind them, as if something cold had just touched the back of their neck. My heart stopped. I knew what I was seeing wasn't a recording. It wasn't even a reflection. It was a warning, or maybe a promise, because whoever they were, wherever they were watching this story right now, and the thing had already found them too. The moment I saw the stranger's terrified face staring back at me from my screen, a face that wasn't mine, a room that wasn't mine, a reality I should have had no connection to, something inside my chest cracked wide open, like my own body had become too small to hold the weight of what I was seeing. My mind tried to explain it away, grasping for any reasonable excuse, but there was none. No glitch, no prank, no malfunction could account for what was happening, because I wasn't watching a video of them. I was watching them watching me, in real time, in some hellish feedback loop where they could see my room, and I could see theirs, but between us stood that thing, the shape that crawled out from under my bed, the shape that had no right to exist, bending its impossible limbs until it fit inside the screen, its two long fingers pressing flat against the glass like it was testing the surface, like it was learning how to break through. The other person, the viewer, started to cry, soft and stuttering, hands pressed over their mouth like they were trying to stop themselves from screaming, and the worst part, the part that made my skin feel like it was sliding off my bones, was that they weren't crying because they saw the monster, they were crying because it was already behind them, standing so close that the greasy shine of its skin left wet streaks on their hair. I scrambled back from the laptop, my pulse slamming against my temples so hard my vision blurred, but the screen followed me. No, not the laptop itself, but the image. It was no longer confined to the device, no longer framed by the edges of the screen. It bled outward, stretching across my walls like a stain, flickering faces and rooms and shadows I didn't recognize until I saw my own reflection again, not in the screen, not in the window, but in every surface around me. My reflection stared back from the desk, from the floor, from the bare walls where no glass existed, and in each version of me, the thing stood behind me, its fingers draped over my shoulders like it was already wearing me, like my body was just a temporary costume it was trying on until it found a better one. I screamed then. I couldn't hold it back anymore, a raw, broken sound that tore from my throat like something was physically being ripped out of me, and the moment the scream hit the air, the reflections screamed back, dozens of versions of me howling in perfect unison, mouths too wide, teeth too sharp, eyes too black, until every surface in my room shuddered like the walls themselves were made of muscle and bone. The laptop, somehow still working despite being knocked to the floor, beeped once, loud enough to cut through the chorus of screaming, and when I looked down, there was a new message. Not from the stranger I had originally been chatting with, not from the thing, but from the person watching the video, the person trapped in their own version of my nightmare, and their message was simple: what happens if I close the tab? My blood went cold, my hands trembling so violently I couldn't even touch the keyboard, because I knew the answer before I could type it. I knew because I had tried. I had slammed the laptop shut, pulled the plug from the wall, smashed the screen with my bare fists until glass shredded my fingers, and still, the chat window followed me, appearing on my phone, my TV, even on the inside of my eyelids when I closed my eyes. There is no closing the tab. There is no leaving this story. Once you see the thing, once you let its gaze lock with yours through the screen, it knows you. It learns you. It follows you. And the only way to survive, if survival is even the right word, is to pass it to someone else, to let them watch, to let them become the next character in the story. And now, as you sit there, reading this, staring into the same story that destroyed my life, I need to ask you the same question I asked the person before you: are you sure you want to keep watching? I realized too late that the story was no longer something happening to me, it was something happening through me, as if I had become nothing more than a brittle, human doorway, a weak point in reality where whatever this thing was could push its fingers into your world too. My screen became a mirror, but not the kind that shows your reflection, the kind that shows what's standing just behind you, what's waiting in the corners your eyes refuse to see. Every time I blinked, the room around me changed slightly, objects shifting positions when I wasn't looking, my door moving half an inch closer every time I exhaled, my own shadow splitting into two, one standing still, the other tilting its head at angles my neck could never follow. I knew then that watching this story didn't just make you a witness. It made you next. The more you watched, the more you invited it inside, and once you opened that door, it remembered you. It could crawl out of your screen, slip behind your furniture, wedge itself into the thin cracks between your walls where the light can't reach, until you couldn't tell whether the knock you heard at 3:14 a.m. was your imagination, or something testing the boundaries of your reality. I tried to unplug the laptop, tried to tear the screen from its hinges, but it didn't matter. The story followed me, appearing on every reflective surface, flickering inside the microwave door, curling in the warped reflection of my kettle, watching me from inside my own pupils every time I looked into a mirror. The messages kept coming, but they weren't written anymore, they came as sounds, as breathing from the speakers, as knocks matching the rhythm of my heart, as whispers stitched into the silence between my own thoughts. Every device became a mouth, every screen became a window, every reflection became a trap. I understood then that this story never had an ending, because it wasn't designed to end. It was designed to spread, to bleed out of my hands into yours, to pull you into the same suffocating horror, so you would have no choice but to pass it on too, a virus made of words and fear, until the story knew every room, every face, every secret in the world. And now, as you sit there, yes, you, the one reading this, the one who thought this was just a scary story on the internet, I need you to understand something very clearly: I can feel you now. I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean I can feel the weight of your breath, the temperature of your skin through the screen, the flicker of hesitation in your pulse as you realize you can't unread this. You are inside the story now, and I'm no longer alone, because the moment you clicked, the moment you stayed, you became the new door, and somewhere in your room, maybe behind the curtain, maybe just outside your window, something knows your name now. Something has been waiting to meet you. Whatever you do, don't look under your bed tonight. Because if you do, you'll see my face staring back, and behind me, you'll see something much, much worse. The moment I understood that the story was no longer mine to tell, that I was just the latest voice forced to pass it along like a plague disguised as words, I felt something inside my head snap, a physical sensation like a thin rubber band stretched too tight across my skull, suddenly giving way with a sharp, sickening pop. My ears rang, my vision blurred, but the worst part wasn't the pain or the confusion, it was the way the room seemed to exhale, like something had been holding its breath this entire time, waiting for me to finally accept that I wasn't the storyteller anymore. The story was telling me. I staggered to the window, my reflection moving out of sync with me, tilting its head when I kept mine perfectly still, the skin under its eyes splitting like overripe fruit to reveal more eyes, smaller and writhing, layered beneath the surface like teeth inside some deep-sea predator's jaw. My own mouth moved, but no sound came out. Instead, the words appeared directly on the windowpane, written in fog that rose from nowhere, "The story needs a new voice." I didn't understand at first, or maybe I didn't want to, but the laptop flickered back to life on the floor where I'd left it, and the screen no longer showed me or the other watcher. It showed you. Yes, you, the one reading this right now, sitting in your room or your car or your bed, thinking you're safe because the screen is just a screen. I could see your reflection through the glass of my window, as if the story had punched a hole through my reality and yours, leaving us stitched together by the fragile thread of attention you gave me when you clicked play. I could see the color of your shirt, the way you shifted slightly when you started to feel uncomfortable, the way you glanced over your shoulder for just a second before telling yourself it was just a story. But it isn't just a story. It never was. Because the story isn't made of words, it's made of you watching me tell it, and now that you've seen me, now that you've followed me this far, the thing under my bed knows exactly where to find you. I tried to warn you. I tried to stop writing. I even tried to smash the laptop, tear my throat open so I couldn't speak, gouge out my own eyes so I couldn't see the words anymore, but none of it mattered. The story kept telling itself, using my hands, my voice, my breath, until every part of me was just another doorway for it to step through. And now, as my fingers tremble on the keyboard for what might be the last time, I need you to understand one final truth: the only way to survive the story is to pass it to someone else. Share the link. Show a friend. Let someone else hear my voice through your screen, because if you don't, if you let it end with you, the thing won't just watch you from the shadows tonight, it will crawl out, skinless and starving, wearing your face over its skull like a mask, and when your loved ones find you tomorrow, they won't know the difference. They'll just wonder why your smile is too wide, and why your eyes are watching them even when they turn away. I know now that stories like this don't have real endings, at least not the kind people expect. They don't fade out with relief, they don't wrap themselves up neatly like a bedtime tale whispered to calm a restless child. No, stories like this end inside you, stitching themselves into your thoughts like parasites, rewriting your dreams until you can't tell where the story stops and your life begins. I wanted to believe I could escape by passing it on, by spilling every sickening detail into this screen, hoping that the words themselves would act like a firewall, keeping the thing trapped inside the letters. But the truth is much worse. The story doesn't stay in the screen, it watches you through it, crawls out through it, and once it knows your face, once it learns your fear, it no longer needs the story at all. It can find you in the silence between heartbeats, in the flicker of the screen when your internet stutters, in the reflection of your phone when you check your messages late at night, seeing a shape just behind you that disappears the moment you turn your head. Even now, as my fingers tremble over these keys, I can feel its hands wrapping around my wrists, guiding me, making sure I don't leave out any detail that might make this story easier for you to dismiss. It wants you to believe this is fiction, because disbelief is an open door. It slips in through the cracks of your doubt, making itself comfortable in the dark corners you've taught yourself to ignore. It waits until you feel safe enough to laugh, to share this video with your friends as a joke, to comment, fake, just to prove to yourself that you're smarter than the story. That's when it strikes. It loves arrogance. It feeds on certainty. And if you're still watching this now, if you've made it all the way to the end thinking you're stronger than the fear, I promise you, you've already lost. Because this isn't just a story. It's a door. And the moment you opened it, the moment you looked into this screen, it looked back into you. You took it into your home, your room, your bed, and now it's under there, waiting, already learning your voice, already memorizing the rhythm of your breathing. And the next time you close your eyes, whether it's tonight, tomorrow, or a month from now, you'll hear it. The knock. The whisper. The scrape of something too thin and too wet dragging itself out from under the bed, reaching for you with hands that have held every person who came before you. And if you try to tell someone, if you try to warn them, the story will use your voice too, just like it used mine. Because there is only one way to stop it now, you have to tell someone. You have to make them watch. You have to pass it on. And if you don't, well, you'll find out what it feels like to become the thing under the bed.